All right, get ready, because today we're diving headfirst into the wild world of online gaming debates.
Yeah, oh, this is gonna be good.
We've got this super intense thread straight from the official World of Warcraft forums, and let me tell you, these players are not holding back.
I can only imagine.
Even if you're not like a hardcore WoW W player,
Yeah.
this deep dive is going to give you a glimpse into just how much gamers care about this whole idea of balance. Like, is it fair or not?
Yeah, it's really interesting how game balance can make people so, I don't know, passionate. Like when you've spent hours and hours getting good at a game, any little thing that feels unfair can feel like a personal attack almost.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like, hey, I put in the work, why am I getting screwed over here?
Exactly. And this thread just throws us right into the middle of it all with this player named Zagrakos.
Okay.
They started off with a post that has this super dramatic title, Hunters and Warlocks, the overpowered PvP meta that must be stopped.
Wow. Straight to the point.
Yeah, they're not messing around. They're calling these classes insane and saying they're just running the show in PvP.
So, like, total dominance.
Pretty much.
What's their beef specifically?
Well, they go after hunters first, claiming their damage output is just ridiculous.
Okay. I can see that being a problem.
Especially certain specializations,
Yeah.
but it's not even just that.
Oh, there's more.
Oh yeah, it's not just about how much they can hit for, but how slippery they are too.
Slippery? What do you mean?
So they've got all these things like disengage, traps, and gap closers, which makes them insanely hard to pin down.
So like a hit and run kind of deal?
Exactly.
For our listeners who might not be super familiar with WoW W, could you break those down a bit?
Yeah, so imagine you're playing a shooter, right?
Okay.
And you have this ability to just instantly teleport backwards, like to dodge an enemy's attack.
Oh, that's handy.
That's disengage.
Gotcha.
Traps are, well, they're traps. Think of them like area denial tools that can slow down or even completely stun your opponents.
I've definitely fallen victim to those in other games.
And then gap closers are abilities that let hunters quickly get right up in your face.
So they've got the damage, they can control the space, and they're super mobile.
It's a nightmare to deal with.
I can see why that would be frustrating.
But wait, there's more?
Oh no.
So Zagrakos isn't done yet. They go on to argue that warlocks are even worse.
Even worse than that.
Because they claim warlocks are more than just damage dealers.
What else can they do?
They're like the ultimate annoyance. They've got fear, stuns, snares.
Oh, the crowd
A
control.
whole arsenal of ways to just completely lock you down.
Sounds rough.
Zagrakos even goes so far as to call them mini tanks
We need tanks, really?
because of their self-healing and shields.
That's interesting because usually you think of warlocks as the glass cannons, right?
Yeah, high damage, but super squishy.
So if they can take a punch now too, that kind of changes things up.
Exactly, and that's basically the core of Zagrakos' whole argument. Hunters and warlocks are breaking the mold. They're good at all three key things in PvP.
Damage, crowd control, and defense.
They think this gives them a crazy advantage in the current meta.
The meta, for those who might not know, is like the current trend of what's considered the best strategies and character choices in a game at any given time.
Right, so basically Zagrakos thinks hunters and warlocks are breaking the game right now.
And when that happens, it can cause a lot of friction in the community, right?
Oh yeah, people who've spent ages perfecting their strategies can suddenly feel like they're at a disadvantage.
Like the rules changed overnight.
Exactly. So it's no surprise that Zagrakos is upset, but here's the thing.
What's that?
Not everyone agrees with them.
Oh, really?
There are some players who are pushing back, like Valdricon, who just straight up says they are fine.
Short and sweet.
Others, like Souvenir, are a little more sarcastic. They're like, are we really calling warlocks tanky? Since when?
Aha, I love that.
And that's where things get really interesting, because it shows how subjective this whole balance thing can be.
Totally. What feels overpowered to one person might be manageable for someone else. Depends on their skill, their play style, who they're even playing against.
So let's get into this warlock debate a little deeper.
Okay, let's do it.
We've got this player, Zanatis. They say they've been playing a warlock since, get this, 2004?
Wow, a veteran.
And they basically throw down a challenge to Zagrakos. So like, make a warlock yourself and try it out, then come back and tell me how OP it is.
I like their style.
Right, and they even add a little XD at the end, just to be extra sassy.
Classic.
So right away, we've got this clash of perspectives.
Zagrakos thinks warlocks are way too tanky, and Xanatus, who's been playing one for years, thinks it's a joke.
It just shows how your own experience can really color how you see the game's balance.
For sure, if you're constantly getting destroyed by a certain class, it's easy to think they're broken, even if it's not the whole story.
And Xanatos goes on to say that the whole tanky warlock thing is more of a cliche than reality.
Interesting. So maybe Zagrakos is falling for some outdated ideas about warlocks?
Maybe. But then another player, Yashiro, jumps in and mentions some very specific things, like Bran and potions.
Okay, without getting too lost in the WoW details, what's the significance of that?
It suggests that there might be a lot more to playing a warlock effectively than Zagrakos realizes.
So maybe it's not just about the warlock's basic abilities, but also how skilled players are using certain tactics and items to survive.
Exactly. So maybe what seems unfair at first glance is actually a sign of a really clever player.
That makes sense. It adds another layer to this whole discussion.
It shows that balance isn't always as simple as it seems.
Absolutely, but Zagrakos isn't letting go of the hunter argument just yet.
Oh no, they're doubling down.
Big time. They come back with a whole laundry list of hunter abilities like survival of the fittest, roar sacrifice, exhilaration, feign death, aspect of the turtle, and tranquilizing shot.
I'm exhausted just hearing all those.
It does sound overwhelming, but let's break it down a bit.
Okay, survival guide time.
So, survival of the fittest and roar of sacrifice are both damage reduction abilities, making hunters harder to kill.
Okay, so they're tougher than they look.
Exhilaration is a strong self-heal, and feign death lets them basically play dead, dropping out of combat and maybe escaping a bad situation.
So lots of ways to stay alive.
And then there's aspect of the turtle, which is like a temporary shield that makes them invincible for a bit.
Oh, that's going to be annoying to play against.
And lastly, tranquilizing shot reduces the opponent's healing,
So they can't even recover properly.
making it even harder to win a fight against them.
So basically, it's survivability on top of survivability.
It's a tough combination to beat.
No wonder Zagrakos is frustrated. They even say people are quitting the game because of how dominant hunters are.
If that's true, it shows just how much perceived imbalance can impact a game's community.
Yeah, people get invested, and when they feel like the odds are stacked against them, it can really take the fun out of it.
For sure, but just when this argument is getting really heated, a new player enters the chat, Sam Kroll, and they bring receipt data, hard, cold numbers to analyze.
Ooh, things are about to get real.
And Sam Kroll drops bomb. According to their data, Destruction Warlocks,
The ones Zagrakos was complaining about.
yep, are actually one of the worst performing specializations in PvP across the board.
What? Seriously?
No joke, they even break it down by game mode.
Hit me with the stats.
Okay, so in Shuffle, which is like a solo queue mode, they're ranked 19th out of 26 specializations.
So, not great.
In 2v2 and 3v3, which are team-based modes, they're 23rd and 22nd.
Even worse.
And in Blitz, which is super fast-paced, they're 20th.
So wait a minute, if the numbers say Destruction Warlocks are actually pretty bad, why are people like Zagrakos so convinced they're OP?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And that's what makes these discussions so fascinating, because data doesn't always tell the whole story.
I guess it's like, you remember those times you got completely destroyed by a certain class, even if it doesn't happen that often overall?
Exactly. Those negative experiences can really stick with you.
So what we've got here is a situation where the numbers say one thing.
But some players feel something totally different.
How do we make sense of that?
Well, Sam Kroll goes on to compare those Warlock stats with Fury Warriors and Retribution Paladins.
Okay.
And according to the data, those classes are performing way better.
Interesting. So maybe the issue isn't that Warlocks are too strong, but that other classes are even stronger.
That's a possibility. Game balance is all relative. It's about how all the classes stack up against each other.
It's like a giant ecosystem. You tweak one thing and it can have ripple effects everywhere.
Exactly. And that brings us to another player, Valdrekon, who offers a different perspective on playing certain classes, particularly casters.
Casters, I think I know what you mean, but for those who don't, what are those?
They're typically damage dealers who rely on spells and ranged attacks.
So like mages, wizards, sorcerers, that kind of thing.
Right, and Valdrekon's argument is that people often underestimate how hard it is to play those classes, especially the ones that aren't very mobile, like warlocks.
I can see that. They might have big damage, but if they get caught out of position, they're toast.
Exactly. It's a high-risk, high-reward playstyle.
So maybe Zagrakos is overlooking the skill it takes to play a warlock effectively.
Maybe it's easy to focus on the damage and forget about the vulnerability that comes with it.
Makes you think, right?
Definitely. And that leads us to our last player highlight for this part of the deep dive. Axfren, a player who claims to have reached a high skill rating with almost every class in the game.
Wow, that's impressive.
They even list all their characters and the ratings they achieved, which suggests that player skill can be a huge factor in overcoming any perceived class imbalances.
So, are they saying that a really good player can make any class work no matter what?
It seems like it, which raises a fascinating question. Is it all about the numbers and the mechanics, or is there an element of human skill and adaptability that can overcome any balance issues?
Like, are some classes just inherently better, or can a skilled player make anything work?
And that's exactly what we'll be exploring in the next part of this deep dive, so stay tuned.
We'll be right back. So before the break, we were talking about Axren, who's out there just crushing it with pretty much every class.
Like they're defying the meta almost.
It really makes you think about how much skill matters, right?
Yeah, it's definitely compelling evidence for the idea that mastery of the game can sometimes outweigh any perceived advantages or disadvantages a class might have.
But imagine giving a master chef a bunch of random ingredients and saying, make something amazing.
Okay, yeah.
They might not have the perfect setup, but they can still pull it off.
I see what you mean.
So if we're saying skill can even the playing field, does that mean this whole debate about Hunters and Warlocks being OP is kind of pointless?
Not necessarily. I mean, even if skill is a huge factor, it doesn't completely change the fact that some classes might just have built-in strengths or weaknesses.
Right.
Game developers are always trying to strike that balance where every class is viable and skill is rewarded, but no one class feels like it's just automatically better.
Yeah, that makes sense, but how do they even approach that?
Honestly, it's a massive undertaking.
I can imagine.
Especially with a game as big and complex as World of Warcraft, there are just so many things to consider.
Where do you even start?
Well, they usually use a combination of data analysis, player feedback, and their own internal testing.
Okay, so data analysis, that seems pretty straightforward. You look at win rates, kill-death ratios, all that stuff.
Right, it's like looking at a sports team's stats to see who's performing well and who's struggling.
Makes sense, but I guess data can't tell you everything.
Exactly. A class with a high win rate might not necessarily be overpowered. It could just be that fewer people are playing it, and the ones who are really good.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
So that's where player feedback comes in.
I bet that can be a mess, though, with everyone having different opinions.
It definitely can be, but even those anecdotal experiences are valuable.
How so?
Sometimes players pick up on subtle imbalances that the data might not show right away.
Like our Warlock debate.
Exactly. The statistics might say one thing, but if a bunch of players are complaining that Warlocks feel too tanky or their burst damage is too high, that's something worth looking into.
So it's about listening to those gut feelings, even if the numbers don't completely back them up.
It's about finding that balance between what the data says and what players are actually experiencing.
And that's where the internal testing comes in.
Right. The developers themselves play the game, try out different classes and strategies, and see how it all feels.
Within their own quality control team.
Yeah, but even with all that, it's still a constant challenge to keep everything perfectly balanced.
Especially with new content and updates always being added.
It's a never-ending process.
And speaking of new content, World of Warcraft has had a ton of expansions over the years, each one shaking things up.
Expansions are like game changers when it comes to balance.
How so?
They can totally flip the script. A class that was dominant before might suddenly become weak, and vice versa.
It's like the whole game gets reset.
In a way, yeah.
I bet that's both exciting and terrifying for players.
It definitely keeps things interesting.
But also means you might have to relearn your whole class or adjust to a totally new meta.
And with each expansion, those balance discussions start all over again.
Players figuring out what's strong, what's weak, and debating whether it's fair or not.
It's like the game is constantly evolving.
So, taking a step back from all this, what have we learned about balance in World of Warcraft's PvP?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that it's complicated. There's no easy answer.
It's not just about who's got the bigger numbers.
Right. We've seen how personal experiences, skill levels, even specific matchups can all influence how people perceive balance.
And it's a constantly moving target. Developers are always making changes based on data and feedback. So where does that leave us, the players?
I think it means we have a responsibility to speak up, share our thoughts, and be part of that conversation about balance.
Even if it gets heated sometimes.
Especially then, because it shows that we care about the game and want to see it thrive.
So if you're out there and you've got strong opinions about balance, don't be afraid to share them.
You never know, your feedback might be the thing that sparks a positive change.
And that's a wrap for part 2 of our deep dive into Hunters, Warlocks, and the quest for balance in World of Warcraft.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's one final question we want to leave you with.
Okay, hit us with it.
Does this deep dive change how you think about these OP arguments? Not just in YW, but in any game you play.
Is it as simple as saying one thing is stronger than another, or is there more to it than that?
That's something for you to think about.
We'll be back in just a moment to wrap things up, so stick around. And we're back for the final round of our deep dive into this whole Hunter and Warlocks saga in World of Warcraft.
You know, it's amazing how much we've unpacked from just one forum thread.
Seriously, it's like a rabbit hole of opinions and data.
We've had fiery debates, cold, hard stats, and even those crazy stories of players who seem to bend the rules with their skills.
But let's zoom out for a second. What does this all tell us about gaming as a whole?
Especially those online games where everyone's trying to be the best.
I think it shows how there's this constant tension between individual skill and having a fair playing field.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
On one hand, you've got players who are all about skill, skill, skill.
They believe that a truly great player can overcome any obstacle, any imbalance, any bad class.
It's like that old saying, a bad workman blames his tools.
Right, if you're good enough, you can make anything work.
But then on the other hand, you've got players who really value fairness.
They want every character to have a fair shot, no matter who's playing them.
They care about the integrity of the competition itself.
To them, it's not about who's the most skilled, it's about making sure the game itself is balanced.
It's almost the nature versus nurture debate, but for video games.
Yeah, is it your raw talent that makes you a winner? Or is it the environment, the tools you're given, the game's systems?
Is it the game that decides who wins, or is it the player?
And like most things in life, the answer is probably somewhere in the middle.
A bit of both.
You need both skill and balance to create a truly great game.
So a game where those super skilled players can still shine.
But nobody feels like they're automatically losing just because they picked the wrong character.
That's the sweet spot, right?
Yeah, and it's a tough one for developers to hit.
They're constantly tweaking and adjusting things to try and find that balance.
But that's what makes online games so exciting. They're always changing, always evolving.
And players are a huge part of that evolution.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just the developers making all the decisions.
Players are giving feedback, sharing ideas, even having those heated arguments on the forums.
It's a collaboration, everyone working together to make the game better.
So, to all the gamers out there, don't be afraid to make your voice heard.
Share your thoughts, even if they're controversial.
You might just spark a change that makes the game more fun for everyone.
It's your passion that drives these games forward.
And that brings our deep dive into Hunters, Warlocks, and the never-ending quest for balance in World of Warcraft to a close.
We've explored the arguments, dug into the data, and seen how much complexity there is to this whole idea of balance.
But as always, we want to leave you with something to think about.
When you see those debates about what's overpowered or underpowered in your favorite games,
Do you see it as a simple case of one thing being better than another?
or do you recognize that there's a lot more going on beneath the surface?
Player skill, game design, the ever-changing meta, it all plays a role.
And understanding that complexity can make those discussions a lot more interesting.
So keep those conversations going, keep challenging those assumptions, and keep pushing for games that are both balanced and rewarding.
Because ultimately, it's your passion that shapes the future of gaming.
That's it for us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, happy gaming.